Hello, friends of the Outhouse, and welcome back to another episode and a fine conversation inside the Outhouse. My name is Pete Smith, founder, orator, telemarketer, and today we are looking at failure in the context of training. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge the country. And so the Outhouse acknowledges the traditional owners of the land that we call Australia and their ongoing connection to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, peoples, and their elders, past, present, and emerging. Whilst I'm recognizing people, I'd like to just recognize the work of the Outhouse oligarchs. Bit of a reduced mob in Cherie and David, but thanks very much for keeping this project alive while I've been sort of skiing in Canada and doing other things. Without any further ado, today's topic, failure in training, failure in outdoor training, stems, I guess, from the fact that I work in a variety of organizations, the UniSC, TOAC, and various schools and other education providers around the place as an instructor, teacher, trainer in the outdoors. Recently, I was involved in a situation where I was, I guess, sitting around thinking about failure and how, one, we communicate failure to our students if we are intending to fail them in whatever course they've committed to. And do we do this well, and can we teach failure and, I guess, taking on board, I have not passed this course, but I'm going to return and do better next time. So with that, I guess, my brief précis of what's going on here, I'd like to just open it up. In our socials, we actually had the question, is failure a four-letter word in outdoor education training? And is there an expectation that when you have paid sometimes the hefty price for training, do you expect to pass? I'd just like to hear some opening comments from others, please.
What percentage of people do you reckon would fail on the average TAFE course or TAFE unit?
Welcome, David. I only have, I guess, the perspective from the courses I teach in, but I would probably, I would probably say that percentage is not that high. I would say over the courses that I teach in, probably less than 10%. But that could be because we are doing a good job of streaming people into the right course, the course that they actually have the skills, experience, and technical attributes to pass. But that I just have my perspective. I don't have any nationwide or even statewide statistics on that, but it would be an interesting thing to investigate. Other comments on that or other things?
I'll jump in and make a comment if you like. I'm teaching at Victoria University in their outdoor programs. We would probably have a fairly low percentage of students who fail a unit. However, in saying that, we tend to find a lot of our students are more of a practical nature, which I think many of us could probably relate to, as probably how a lot of us learn and that anyway. Being wound up in the tertiary sort of sector, there's that sort of element of sort of more theoretical academic work, and we really wrestle with that between that nexus of theory versus prac, and how much of both do we have in there. Many of our students cope with it well, but we also, we do get a small percentage who struggle on that. and that can ultimately lead to them perhaps not passing a unit. I think the big thing for us is that to somewhat, and this might sound a bit strange, but to somewhat sort of normalize it. And we talk about different parts of various units and how through failure we actually produce some of our greater learning. And so that's on a obviously a smaller scale to just a unit. But for example, I think, navigation, when I take my students out navigating, I'm hoping like anything they go wrong, because I think that's where they really learn to navigate well. So I kind of want them to fail on those small aspects to build their capacity. I think in terms of a unit, when if a student is to fail that unit, it's really rallying around that student to sort of understand why. Was it that they didn't understand something? Was it my fault as a teacher? Was it their fault as the student? Was it just something that happened? Did they have some sort of coincidence or something that happened that has added stress or something onto that student that has limited their capacity to pass the unit? I think it just comes down to having that conversation with the student to try to find out why, so that we can help them set themselves up for success moving into the future.
Hi, my name is Vishwas. I live in India, and I will expect to be visiting Australia soon. And the title of today's conversation caught my attention. I'm trying to understand the context for failure. Is this in the context of the educational course, or is it in the practice?
Well, I guess as my understanding is, when I first came across this topic, my feeling was that if as a teacher or instructor you are running a training course and you have to fail a student because of their failure to meet the assessment criterion for that course, then do we do a good job of communicating that, and on what grounds are we failing people, and is that being well done? However, since presenting the topic, I was contacted by Dr. Claire Dallett from Risk and Resolve, and she presented an article which presented a whole new perspective on failure in outdoor training, which was all around the risk management side. And the article suggests that if we train in what is defined as normal circumstances, i.e. we go on a bushwalk and with our trainees, for example, and we just do a bushwalk and we have fairly normalized conditions, then this isn't actually preparing people for those conditions where failure might occur. And I think that's a very interesting argument, and I would very much like with the people here to, as well as unpack the assessment part of the argument, perhaps look more at that and the fact that we need to be delivering outdoor training that is a bit more robust and hard I don't want to use the word hardcore, but so that students are perhaps challenged a little bit more in their training, so it prepares them more for a realistic experience. And I have spoken too long, but I hope that answers that question.
It's always a bit weird because you do like a kayak assessment and you're pretending to teach a bunch of other instructors and they know what they're doing. So you try and explain stuff to them, but they already know what they're supposed to be doing anyway. So it's a bit of an unrealistic assessment in some ways.
the article really presented an argument that said we have to first train in normalized conditions, and then once we, as trainees or students, we are comfortable in those conditions, then we need to really up it so we're actually training in conditions which we may experience failure. And an example that was given was you're doing a crossing of an ice lake, and you actually train initially to cross the ice lake, and then you actually practice falling through the ice into the icy water, and then you and your team rescuing out of that situation, which is much more of a compromised position for students rather than being just all crossing safely. It's a very interesting article, and it's been put in the chat by David.
I think some of those things are very difficult to facilitate in some ways because they're not necessarily authentic. And I think that's we sit on a fine line between what is authentic and what isn't. However, I think if that is discussed with our students, we're never going to get the perfect situation, I guess, until it's going wrong. And I guess that's the point that we can learn from, but we don't necessarily want to set up situations to purposefully go wrong because we then lose that control over it. So it's that fine balance between authentic, inauthentic experiences that students can learn from without going too far with it, I guess. Does that make sense?
Hey, apologies. Hello, everybody. I'm a little bit behind the time. I think it does make sense, Ian. Can you just give me a quick snapshot of where you're at? Just because I've got some thoughts, but I just don't want to misalign them with or misconstrue them as to where we're at in the conversation.
Hello, Munj. I'll, I guess, try and summarize for you if I can. So when I initially, I guess, thought about this, I was thinking about failure in terms of a student not actually reaching the criteria, an assessment criterion, and us having to fail that student, and how we communicate that, and do we do a good job of communicating that. And that was the initial basis of, and do we teach failure, I guess, to our students well. And then during the week of the lead up to this, Claire Dallett presented an article presented at the International Risk Management Conference, which talks about us training for failure in not what the article describes as non-normalized circumstances where we're actually really taking people out of their comfort zones and really, pushing, I guess, the limit of training in the outdoors so that we actually almost reach that point where we're failing. And that presents, I think, another very interesting aspect of failure within the context of training. So that's sort of where we're at. Others, please feel free to add in, because I am not an expert and I don't have an amazing memory. So if I miss something, please add it in.
Greetings, everyone. Pete, I think there's two contexts, if not more, to this. The first would be a university or an official training organization where you're expected to gain a qualification. And then the second would be your boots on the ground at activity centres, at residentials, at programs, and how the staff they're managing training. I know from past experience from the actual external training providers here in South Africa, one of them gives the people ample opportunity. In other words, they've got a whole year to do the course and to be signed off on the various modules. And they go through training and then retrained, and by the end of the year, if they don't make it, they might have a base qualification, but they're not signed off on a specific activity. So they wouldn't get their qualification, let's say, for climbing if they didn't meet the standards or the criteria, but they may well be able to be a mountain walker or a paddle guide or something like that. And then for us here in-house, we take those qualifications and then we don't allow anyone to do their activities until they've been signed off and assessed internally also. And that sign-off and internal assessment, we've just had a person here who's taken them 6 months to get one of the sign-offs. And they then shadow work with somebody, but we give them ample opportunity to be able to know where they're going wrong, to relearn, to repractice, and then to take the assessment again. But they won't be allowed to run an activity or lead an activity by themselves if they're not at that level yet. So we're not comfortable with them, even if they have an external qualification. And so I suppose one is a bit more legalistic in the sense of view of you've got X amount of time to do it in. And if you haven't done it, then you lose the qualification or that aspect of the qualification. And the second one is a bit more of an in-house approach where we're giving you as many chances as we can, but up to some point where we're just going to say, sorry, you don't meet the qualification criteria that you had said you had on your CV or when you came for the interview. And either you're never going to do that activity or we relook at your employment.
I think, thanks, Alan, for that insight. I think one of the models that we used to have at La Trobe when I was there, and we somewhat replicated at Uni SC, I'm not too sure about whether you extend someone's capacity, especially in an educational context, to the point of failure that they're well outside of their scope of practice. But what we used to do there was extend them to a point, say, I'll give you an example. So if we're working on rivers, whitewater kayaking, it used to be scaffolded where they'd spend some time on the Big, they'd go to some other rivers, they'd develop some river rescue skills and their other paddling skills, and then they would have a 6-day trip on the Midder, with the idea that 6-day trip on the Midder would extend them beyond their normal boundaries of what they'd been comfortable paddling in. They'd got to a stage where they were comfortable paddling on the Big and a few other rivers, and then the Midder was certainly a jump up, but in a manageable environment with staff with them, with the idea and the intention that once they had got to that level and they realised that there's that experience identified some things that were still beyond their capability. It's like, we're not yet ready to navigate this river by ourselves, but we do have the skills to be able to get down the river safely under guidance. And that allowed them to come back to the Big and those sort of things with a different recognition of their skill set and their understanding what their capacity was, which meant that they operated with a lot more confidence, but also with awareness of, yes, I can do these things, but no, I can't. I'm not yet at that stage. And I think that worked as a pretty good model. I'm not sure if I'm on the same path as what you've been talking about. But similarly, at Uni SC, we're doing something where they're sea kayaking. They'll go for quite a lot. Their final expedition is a number of steps beyond what they are then expected to instruct on and what they're then expected to lead others on, with the notion that gives them a level of comfort. They may have failed on that, but then they can see their value or their level of experience at that other level when you come back and roll it back. I think that's a reason, like similar to what Ian was saying, creating circumstances which I think of yes, that lack of level of authenticity is difficult when you lose some students, especially if you're hiding things from them and you create scenarios which, oh yeah, there's an accident, you've got to deal with this, and then you only tell them afterwards it's a scenario, and that really brings up a whole heap of issues with students and trust and those sort of things. And I think we can also look towards, well, what do some of the emergency services do, and some of those areas which operate with significant levels of scenarios, but it's well planned out, and they're looking for specific learning opportunities that come from that. And that often, when they're working on that, they're working to come back to, when you talk to the emergency services, they're coming back to models that they've got in their head that they've seen before, and that they can then replicate in this newfound environment. And if we extend our students too far beyond their level of knowledge or experience, they don't have the models to replicate that, and then you leave them in a state of cognitive dissonance, which doesn't allow them to actually manage themselves in that environment. So they may have reflections afterwards, but it might be that big a gap that they can't then put it into practice elsewhere, and you can cause damage. I'm not sure. Hopefully I'm making some sense, but yeah. So I think that model of training where you do just move them beyond, and obviously sequential. And I think, Alan, you could probably do that in an environment such as a campsite where you're working with people and you're gradually extending them beyond, knowing that on their day-to-day basis, that gives them confidence to do what their normal is, so to speak. But it's not so far removed, like a bit more advanced. But I think often we found, say with roping, if you taught them too advanced or you put them in a circumstance which drew on too many skills, that would be their instantaneous go-to. Oh, I've done this, so now I'm trying to replicate that, when it's actually just a simplified thing that they have to do. So hopefully that makes some sense or some knowledge. Whoops.
Brendan, it does. So we start off with our sign-offs actually right even down to the dining hall and packing equipment away and things like that before they even progress. So there is a progression here, right the way through from the basics: managing equipment, managing students in the dining hall, managing your initiatives and your games and your and facilitation skills before they even get to a stage where, okay, now you signed off on climbing, or you signed off on paddling, or etc. So there's a definite progression, and people can then see where they're going, if that makes sense, and how we work.
That level of sequencing, Alan, but that is perhaps more possible in a facility like the one that you're managing, rather than if someone is, say, enrolling in a course in a specific technical area and then completes that course and then moves on.
Yeah, very much so. And that's why I said you've got to differentiate between, is it an academic environment or is it a program environment?
I think I think it was Shane Galloway, might be wrong, a number of years ago wrote about the topic of qualification versus certification, and the notion that there is limits to what we can qualify someone for within an educational training environment. And then it shifts to Alan's role where he certifies them for his place of employment. And I think that's probably those sort of, potentially there runs a risk that we can't, in a training environment, extend them far enough to actually go well beyond the threshold that we say is reasonable for them to go out and start employment. It's then the role of Alan to say, these are the limits that I can now employ this person in, knowing my program. I think that's also an avenue, but the difficulty is quite often, I guess, in an employment situation, you're needing people to fill spots fairly quickly, and sometimes you don't always have the time and scope you're hoping that the qualification has got them up to speed far enough that they can be comfortable, but I think there's probably some failures on that side as well when it happens.
Yeah, Brendan, sorry to hog the conversation, Pete. I think there's another aspect to this that we need to consider when it comes to safety. If a instructor or a guide or whatever you want to call it is confident in what they are doing, then that flows back to how the participants see them also. So if you have a guide who might kind of know what they're doing, the participants are very quick to pick up on it, and then their comfort zone as such shrinks, and they are less willing to trust the guide or the instructor. And so when it comes to a clear path of how a lead person gets signed off and how they know what they're doing, one, it's the safety aspect, obviously, and the second is the psychological aspect that has a big impact on the program. I'm sure we've all experienced an instructor, being around an instructor or a guide who really know what they're doing, not overconfident, but know what they're doing and how the participants react to that and how it benefits the program, compared to someone who's unsure of themselves and makes mistakes in tying knots and gets it right eventually. But the participants aren't as willing to take the risks that you would hope, or the perceived risks as you would hope them to.
I think that's important what you added in there too, Alan, in terms of they're not overconfident. That, you know, overconfidence can be just as bad as underconfident. It's trying to find that balance of the two, which I think just adds to that complexity of the whole lot. But you can see it. You can see it in an instructor or a leader or whatever, that when they've got it, they've got it. You know, they're willing to say, hey, I'm not comfortable in this situation. They're willing to take the lead when they are comfortable and go. And I think both is just as important.
Yeah, very much so, Ian. I was listening to a podcast last week by High Five, and they said something that I've never ever considered before. And he said the more qualified and experienced a instructor is, or the greater the gap of disconnect they have with the participants, particularly when it comes to students, because it's, you know, look at me, I've got everything. And often there is that overconfidence, not so much in a risk sense of view, but as in a, you know, I've had 20 years of experience, 30 years of experience, I've got all these qualifications, and they actually can't relate to the students any longer, or their participants. And so even us, it's something to be aware of. As we're pursuing qualifications, how do we still stay very well grounded and be able to still connect even with the person who as a participant might be very well out of their depth and their comfort zone.
I think one way guides, instructors, trainers can stay connected is by continuing to practice their craft in their personal lives, and not just in a capacity where you're actually working with participants, but actually going on outings and I guess taking your that skill set, whatever it happens to be, and testing it a little bit. I think that makes us remember, and also just remind ourselves that you know, participants are often way out of their comfort zone, and remind ourselves back to that time when we were that person. I, as a person who's fairly chronically scared of heights, as someone who knows me well will always attest to, I think it gives me great empathy when working with participants at height, because I can really relate to their nervousness and what they're actually going through. And I think that relationship is really part of quality training as well.
I'm so happy to hear that that the struggles that Alan mentioned across cultures appear to be the same. That when you've been in an environment that's that might be comfortable for you for 20 years in the business, and then we constantly lose touch. And somewhere, I think there's this sense that as an instructor, I've been performing my role and doing my job well for so many years, and I can do that well. But the connection that they seem to maintain is with more with equipment than at the human level. And I wonder, I mean, I'm just looking at, this is my first time, so apologies. I'm just looking at the group here and I'm saying, I guess many of us have been in the field for years, and whether some of that expertise remains with us and doesn't transfer at the human level when we're actually on a program or in practice.
I used to think the same time when I was on my 20th program of the year, I'd have to go down to the Oval and look and remind myself that these kids are coming out there for the first time and they've never done this before and it's all new to them.
Yeah, I think it's really important to see it through your participants' eyes more than your eyes. And Vishwas, you raised an interesting point there. I was just chatting this morning to someone about, at what point do technical skills, how do we balance soft skills and technical skills? In this industry, we seem to have people who are exceptionally skilled on the technical side, but their soft skills are missing, and vice versa. Incredible soft skills, but not great technical skills. And how do we find that balance and grow both sides of it at the same time instead of it being separate silos?
I'd just like to comment on that little piece. That it just appears to me that, and this appears across cultures. So I've done some traveling in the US. I've done some in the UK, and I'm going to be coming to Australia to do some training. Interestingly, and one of the things that I was asked to really pay attention to was this whole act of reflection. That many of us who join, I guess, courses in outdoor ed come from a need to be in the outdoors, and it fulfills our need, but very often leaves our participants, or it doesn't develop enough ability, I guess, in our ability to get a reflection going. And so I can do a great job with the activity, and it could be gaming as well, or initiatives, I think, in different places it's called. But but how do I make meaning from it? And somewhere, I think we across cultures we're losing the connect between activity, experience, and the reflective piece of it. And I don't know if any balance is ever possible, but because I mean, what the hell is balance on this planet anyway? We assume that it is, and um, and how do we get somebody who loves the outdoors so much to be able to have a simple conversation with participants? And is there some way to simplify that whole process and not make it so complex that they say, "Oh my God, I don't know which question to ask first"? In some ways, I'm feeling a little more comfortable about doing some training in another culture, that the problems are the same and they're human. They're not technology. They're human. And as long as they remain human, um, there's hope.
Vishwas, I want to say, so firstly, greetings from Zambia. Okay, and this group and Pete and David has been tremendous for me. I was from South Africa before I moved up to Zambia, and it's been so amazing to see this when it started during COVID, to see how many things we have that are similar across the board. And in talking to people in the States, they have the same questions. And so you're 100% correct that it's more than just a cultural thing or more than just an isolated thing. It seems to be a a lot of the stuff is industry wide. And it's great to have you and everyone part of a think tank here who we can share ideas and grow cross-culturally and see, hold on, actually, these are the things we're doing right across the face of the planet, and these are the things that we need to change or improve on.
One of my, this is the first time I'm here, I mentioned, and one of my questions, I love the topic, which is about failure in training. And I'm beginning to see that that you can have an outdoor ed course and get kids to pass the exam or not, but the struggle is still the same, that somewhere what we do in college is separated, or there's a gap between what we're doing in college and what happens in the field. And is there another way of looking at how we design and deliver courses at all? Is there such a thing as a practitioner's course? And I've been teaching a course in experiential ed in India for a dozen years now, and I call it a practitioner's course. And of course, it may not deal with the kind of risk, physical risk that an outdoor ed course, might train students for. But why will there always be a gap between academics and practice?
Well, as someone who perhaps has a foot in the academic camp as a teacher, and then in the, I guess, organizational camp as someone who works for a range of other organizations who are perhaps less university or academic, I would suggest that we need to close the gap between the practice and academia, and that's what I think people in this field should always be trying to do. I think we should be talking openly between practitioners and training organizations, whether they be universities, TAFEs, other RTOs, private training organizations. We should open that conversation so that what is being delivered in training is actually what practitioners need and want, and what people who are actually running programming in the field need and want. But I'd like to hear from some people who work for some universities comment on this as well.
I use the term loosely that I work, Pete, for a uni, but the difficult thing with unis, and I work for University of Sunshine Coast, and previously I've been doing it for, I don't know, since I had hair, so long enough. The difficulty now is the gap in sort of the unis managing their risk, and there's quite a considerable concern associated with students going out on placements and what that looks like from a placement perspective. We have a difficulty, especially in outdoor environmental ed, that because we don't have so much of a national body that assesses where a student's at or assesses a course like ESSA does in like sports science, and so even the teaching colleges, it's difficult for us to say that no, a student needs X number of days in the field. And some of that should be both in-house through what we provide, and then out-of-house through sort of placing them with Andrew Boyle or with you, Vishwa, or you, Dave, or whoever, where they are then under the guidance similar to what would be a school prac. Without that, we then struggle to say and justify, why would we charge students for a course that they then go out and spend most of their time in a prac placement? That's probably one of the gaps, along with risk management. I don't know how you find it, Ian, whether that's a scenario that you're confronted with as well, but that's certainly the battle that we have. If there was a national body that said, and we kind of have it with the Australian Tertiary Outdoor Ed Network and also Outdoor Education Australia with the development of the threshold concepts. Ideally, they became something that would be nationally recognised, and then we could push to say, well, some of those have to be done within a place or a setting where a student has to be within an employment position or something similar. Let me gather my thoughts. I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's certainly one of the areas that we struggle to make that bridge or bridge that divide.
I think well, sorry, I'll agree with you there, Mungie, just on because there's no guidelines there, it's really hard for us to argue. And as I'm in Victoria, sort of southeastern Australia, as in our region, a lot of the universities are being hit quite hard by their own university to reduce their workloads, reduce their time in the field, et cetera, et cetera. And it's come round, it's our turn now. But the problem that we have is the other two universities that offer courses have been hit. And so they've reduced their days. And so it becomes really hard for us to justify our days when they've had to reduce theirs. And so without any guidelines there to suggest what we need to be at, it's really hard for us to maintain those field days. However, in saying that, I think we need to be really careful in terms of where is it best to teach whatever it is that we're teaching. I think as out there educated, we often think, oh, well, the best place is outdoors in the field teaching it. But sometimes that's not the case. And I think we get a little bit carried away with that. And it's trying to find that balance between the two. Where is the best place for the participant to learn what they need to learn in order to be out working professionally in the field?
Yeah, and that's, I agree with you there, Ian. Alan, I'll let you say. So,
I know in South Africa there's almost a conflict between the university qualifications and practice, as in learning through the ground, from the ground up. The balance for me is that if we don't understand the theory, we don't know the why. And that is where universities and the formal qualifications come in, is what is the theory behind what are we doing and why it works. And then from there to have the center saying, actually, you know what, we understand learning theory, we understand constructivism, we understand Kolb's experiential learning, etc., etc., etc. We understand risk management theories. Now let's put those into practice. The flip side is if you're a great instructor, but you don't understand the theories or the how can I say, the history behind what you're doing, and the education side of it, you're going to struggle. You're always going to ask yourself, what's the point of me doing this? What is my purpose? And how does it work? How does it fit into society? How does it fit into my programs? How does it fit into my daily life? What's the relevance of it?
I was just wondering, maybe we should just accept that the theory and the practice are two separate pieces, and then keep them separate. At least it clarifies what organizations that run camps and stuff like that, at least now they know where the students are coming from, and then can be trained appropriately, the way, Alan, you've been doing. That way it just leaves no doubt about where we're starting them. Sometimes I think we're trying to put everything into one bucket, and maybe that's not appropriate.
It's a bit more like that in the UK. I did a university course and it was 2 years of uni, and you got the theory in that, and you got taken out on practicals. But if you wanted any practical quals, so climbing, kayak, anything like that, you had to do that separately, and the uni would subsidize it, but there was a whole separate practical stream compared to the academic stream, because they're all community-based quals. The practical ones are.
I think it's really hard to separate because I think we need, when we're out in the field and we're teaching a practical element, we need to have those personal skills in amongst that. And if we separate the two, I think we'll fail to actually bridge them later on if we're not careful. Some of what some of you have talked about earlier in terms of some of the paddling skills or something, and then for us we can often take those for granted because we're fairly competent in that activity perhaps, and it's really hard to relate to that student. But if we can understand and we have that understanding where they're coming from, and we can utilize our personal skills within that to really talk to that student on a level that they understand, then we can get those practical skills to a much higher level than if I'm scratching my head sort of going, it's not that hard to do a forward paddle. Why can't you do this properly? Why are you going in circles? And we can tell them all the cues in the world, but if we can't connect with them on a personal level, we're wasting our time and we're wasting their time perhaps. There has to be this blend of the two. And I think, yes, we can get some people who are excellent practically. We can get people who are excellent with the interrelational skills, but the best leaders are the ones that have got both and can bring those together.
Ian, I couldn't agree more, mate. Just wanted to say that.
Andrew Boyle, can I ask you the question? You see lots coming through your world of employment. How do you see that? Like, I've just put up that paper, which is the one by Galloway around that certification for the employment. We can qualify them, we can do all of that at a uni level, but how do you see it actually in practice in terms of, we might have shifted away from Pete's original thing, but your role as an employer in, like, here in Southeast Queensland, where you're probably just starting to get more uni graduates, or you've had uni graduates from elsewhere come in?
I've been sitting and listening to everyone, and I sort of think in some ways, a lot of the time, the best people are already the best people before they start their qualifications. And so you can see people who are rolling through a course and they just get it for a number of reasons. But when you talk to those people, you find out that they've done all their dumb stuff when they were like between 12 and 18. And they've done like, big rivers or ridden skateboards down crazy stuff. And they know what getting hurt is about. So I tend to find that when you've got people who understand at a basic level what an adventure is, they tend to be able to, with the theoretical side, manage that into a good experience for another person. And I think that we tend to forget that even though we always seem to look at a course as being taking someone from nothing. And I don't know, I think it can work, but I think a lot of the people who are coming through who end up being good and staying in the field, for example, a lot of their base skills are already there. Like they certainly know how to look after themselves more than anything else. So that's probably what I tend to look for more is that, I suppose, aliveness and passion type of stuff. And then the other stuff you can sort of shave off the rough bits and use sort of, various training models to make people, more appropriate in some of the stuff that they already really know how to do. So, yeah, that's the way I sort of see it.
I like that, Andrew. One of our questions when we are employing new instructors is, what do you do during your free time? And what are your hobbies? Because if they are going to go climbing or hiking or paddling in their free time, even before being employed with us, then it sets a good foundation that they've got an experience, they've got some of the skills to varying degrees, but they've got a passion for it. It's not just a job. And I think all of us, a passion carries us far further than, or the mentality that it's a passion or a livelihood, than it's just a form of employment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that goes back to my comment earlier where I said I think people need to be, I guess, enjoying the practice of their trade as well as actually working in it. Do you think that you reach a point where you've done enough training? Do you think people become, I don't want to use the word, but people develop enough skills that they can just remain upskilled by simply continuing with practice? Or do you think ongoing training is a better path?
I'll jump in. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been in the background at work and I'm now off the clock so I can share, legally share. I'll reflect on that because I've been reflecting recently as a practitioner of 27 something years. Should I go back and get my basic flat water instructors for canoe? And I reached out to the relevant canoeing authority here in Queensland and was promptly told nothing in the calendar, but we'll let you know. And in the last week or so, they've offered me some dates with about a week's notice. But the cost is about $950 just for the training before I do an assessment piece, plus the cost of hiring a canoe and the cost of lost income whilst I'm not working for another school or centre during that time. And it's a 2-day course in the middle of a week. So aside from my whinging about this particular national provider and the way they approach their training, I don't know if it's worth my while anymore. My logbook stands on its own. I've had 0 incidents in the last 20 years in terms of canoeing. But it'd be nice to go back and refresh skills that I don't have to sharpen that saw. But is it actually going to lead to more work? Is it going to be professional development just for the sake of professional development? And I'm having that argument with myself at the moment. And I completely understand, the instructor involved in this bigger course needs to make a daily rate that's equivalent to what they would ask in a commercial sense. But most of my work is with school groups, so led outdoor adventure. And it's not in moving water. It's not highly skilled environments. It's a lot of lakes and little creeks here and there, and it's a lot of beginning instruction. But so I sort of struggle with that a little bit, given that in our national framework, I have my qualification, but I don't have the national body's endorsement of that qualification because I haven't renewed it in the last 3 years, let alone the last 10.
I'll jump in there and make a couple of comments. I think in our profession as outdoor leaders and instructors and teachers, wherever we're practicing in the world, we need to maintain a standard of excellence in our practice. So that's my first point. And I think we do that through ongoing training, whether that be with community-based organizations or national bodies or whatever they happen to be. And I think that at least in Australia, although it's not legislated, there is a set of guidelines around, say, paddle sports, as that was the example given, where they actually state ratios for various different types of water and different types of craft. And as a practitioner, I feel like I'm personally, even if I'm working for my own my own organization, I feel like I'm being rather negligent to the overall profession if I'm not operating within that sphere. That's my opinion.
I often wonder with that stuff too, though, Pete. Like, at what point are we handing over professional judgment and our professional skills to being dictated, particularly a ratio, when a ratio can actually be something that can be raised and lowered depending on the group, the situation, the area, a whole range of different factors that can come in there. And I feel like there's a lot of times when we're not in that training realm, where we're not actually training for people to think, or for people to actually process ambiguity. People seem to be looking more for what's the rule, rather than how can I make this work, and how can I make this a productive experience for these people. And I understand why some of those things are there, but I feel like we need to be really cognizant of writing ourselves into a corner where what we can do and what we can deliver is significantly restricted to becoming something that's more or less becomes not an authentic experience for people, and a completely contrived experience. So that's some of the stuff that I think that we need to try and maintain.
And I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying, Critter, and I actually agree with you. But how do we within the increasing realm of safety that has been discussed within this forum today, how do we maintain that and yet maintain an authentic experience? What's the balance?
I think it's one of those. Well, those things where we need to look at safety stuff more not from a rule book, and not from looking more at sort of like a safety culture type of perspective, and to not dial ourselves in with paperwork to such a degree that it becomes completely dissociated from what's happening on the ground. I think, and that's where I think some of the stuff around making sure that people are staying active and aware and understanding that things that failures can happen keeps you safer and keeps your program and the people around you safer if you're not constantly just looking at what the rules are. And I know that there's a balance in a lot of that stuff, but I feel like currently we're shifting towards this tick a box approach, where a lot of industries are starting to move back to something that's a bit more a balance between the two.
I might just jump in and ask Dave Bursey if he's got. We've had a couple of conversations in the last term about different approaches in different states in Australia, and then I might throw to David Chitty, who's just jumped in from Victoria, if he's got any comments as we're coming up to the top of the hour for our meeting today.
So I've just come back from South Australia. Actually, I think I'm working with you next week, David. It's different down there. Like the culture there feels like what it was on the eastern states 5 or 10 years ago. But definitely the center I was working at, the manager didn't have an outdoor ed background as such. He had a managerial outdoor ed background. So he did everything very by the book, because he didn't have that sort of back knowledge to be able to make the judgment based on experience. And that was where I was trying to help with some of that stuff. But there's also differences down there. Like they'll take Paddle Australia quals, but they won't take the TAFE canoeing qualification. They have their own climbing qualification that's only valid in South Australia. There's a few weird things going on down there.
All right.
I'm not just saying that because I'm not just saying that because I just spent $2,000 on a kayak so I can renew my Paddle Australia quals.
Mr. Chitty, do you have any comments on the topic, having just jumped in the last 10 minutes here? You're on mute, David.
I've been gold panning with groups all day today, so I've just sent them off. Yeah. I think what we need to be careful of with whatever we're going with our risk management and the way we run things is that we as an industry manage what we're doing rather than have the various WorkSafe departments, for instance, come in and manage it for us. So, yeah. So however we move forward, we want to be in control of what we do. I don't think we currently train people to think and to risk manage properly. So maybe we need to rethink the way we do our training and the type of people we select, yeah, to move into the industry. If you've got people with with less competency and experience, then they've got to have serious guidelines. The more competency and experience that we have out there in the industry, we can then let people be a bit more judgmental about what we do. I don't believe we have that currently, certainly not in Victoria anyway, with some of the things I see happening in cliffs and caves and other areas.
Well, thank you all for your comments. We have spoken for actually over an hour. We will turn the recording off now because otherwise I think we could go on for another hour. Thank you all for your input on this very interesting topic of training in the outdoor sector.